Well, good morning again. We're glad that you could join us again for our devotional for the week. And once again, we have with us Bob Reeder, who's going to be helping us, has been helpful in helping us take apart and understand the the construction of the Bible, how we got the Bible, where the various codices came from, and how we got a canon of scripture. And today we're going to shift gears just a touch, and we're going to go take a look back at some of the historical surroundings of the Bible and the people of Israel, and the sort of history that surrounded them as the prophets would speak into this. So, Bob, good morning.
Good morning to you, John.
Okay, and here we go. We're gonna, this is something that's it's really kind of confusing to us. It's a long time ago. It is history, but it's a history from a different land and a different time, and yet it is so vitally important into the scriptures and into the message really of the prophets. So I'm wondering if you could help us deconstruct some of our thinking on the history of the people of Israel.
I have been accused of having great skills in destruction. I don't know if that's exactly what you were referencing, but we'll take it from there.
Take it apart. That's what I'm talking about. Help us take it apart.
This is week number 4, and again, to put it in a little bit of context, and that's a word I use often because I think it really is helpful to our understanding. These 5 weeks that John and I are doing in the devotions are really a prelude, if you will, to a class that I am going to teach beginning on October 1st. I always try to work in a plug for the class on Thursday nights, dealing with the minor prophets. So all this background is really tied to, if you will, the minor prophets class that we're going to teach. Today, as John said, I'm going to look at 10,000 feet or 100,000 feet, what some of these historical time periods are, so that when we get into the weeds, when we get into the actual minor prophets, as we will see, are heavily involved in the nations of Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom. But it's not isolated. It's all in relationship to the surrounding world that was there. So this is going to give us this kind of context, if you will, as we prepare to go into some of the details in the class. I'm going to start, as the outline shows here, on a very broad basis, archaeological. And there are errors again, and I guess they're kind of like outline topics. Roman numeral 1 and A, as I've done here, like that. Again, if you're thinking about it and read about it, when you see some of these terms, it's great in my mind to have some kind of concept of where they fit, what years are involved, and where they fit one with another. We'll skip over prehistoric, because that could be years as terms of study. And Stone Age, and why is it called the Stone Age? And it's called the Stone Age because basically these are based on what archaeological evidence they find that tools were made with stone, brilliantly enough. And you'll see there, it's from the very beginning of the time up until about 3300 BCE. Take a second again, BCE, before the Common Era. Depending on what text or book you're using, it would be BC, before Christ, or particularly in non-religious contexts or authors who do not want their works necessarily associated with a particular religion, it's come into being the abbreviation BCE, before the Common Era. You'll see that I switch back and forth frequently, and it's usually based on what the book that I'm reading and using has done. So hope that doesn't concern people. Happy to chat with you later on about it at a point. But you'll see, so BCE is the same as BC, and BC or CE, Common Era, is the same as AD. So the first one is Stone Age. Then you go to the Bronze Age. And frankly, I had to look it up. What is bronze? And bronze is a combination of copper and tin. And again, these are based on tools that are found in archaeological sites like that. And so that's from about 330 BC to about 1200 BC. And then you get into an era in terms of archaeological work and studies and excavations of the Iron Age. And since these are fairly large categories, you can see it's about 700 years or so, from 1200 BCE to 586 BC. Almost always the Iron Age is broken down into at least two subsections, if you will. And the first one is Iron Age 1, 1200 BC to 1000 BC. And at that point in time, you'll see these states that we're going to be talking about, and the minor prophets spend a lot of time talking about, and lands that the minor prophets are talking about. Philistia, Phoenicia, sometimes referred to as the Sea Peoples, Canaan, Aram, which is almost always associated with Damascus, and certain Transjordan groups. That's Transjordan meaning east of the Jordan River.
Yeah.
So you get those nations that are there, and we'll be talking about that. So that's Iron Age 1.
Bob, could I break in here just a second?
Certainly.
Just to put a stake in the ground, when we talk about the Bronze Age, 3300 BCE to 1200 BCE, just to give you some context, Abraham was approximately 2000 BC. Moses would have been approximately 1500 BCE or BC. So that just to give you some context of this time frame a little bit.
Right. Yeah, good. That's it. And in fact, for this Iron Age 2, you'll see that the outline provides a little bit of framework here, right, as it relates to what our primary topic is, which is the either united or divided kingdom of Israel, like that. So thanks. And I will be handing out and using, John, you've seen it, a timeline when we get to the class itself. And since it's a prophet, the first prophet, and the prototypical prophet, if you will, is Moses. And John's right, it's about 15 or 1550. And again, the further back in time you go, and I'm sure everybody realizes this, the further back in time you go, the less precise you are with regard to the exact dates.
Right.
So this Iron Age, second part of the Iron Age, 1000 BC to 586, you'll note that those dates are very relevant, and they are in fact tied to the history of Israel. The United Monarchy, Saul, David, and Solomon runs the period about 1000 to about 900. And we'll get into some more details of that later on, if not today, certainly during the class. But that's about this 100-year period where there was one Israel, the United Monarchy under those three kings. And then about 930, and that's the date that almost everyone uses, sometimes 931, but 930, the kingdom divides, and we'll go through that specifically in the class itself. The kingdom is divided into the northern nation, which is called Israel, sometimes confusing because we use the whole concept of Israel. But in this context, the northern kingdom is Israel, and the southern kingdom is called Judah. And you'll see that the Iron Age 2 period is from 1000 BC to 586. 1000 is when the United Monarchy began, and 586 is the end of the southern and last of the two kingdoms. So that is when Babylonia came down through Nebuchadnezzar. And again, the class will have a whole lot more on this, but under Nebuchadnezzar came down and destroyed Jerusalem, razed it, took the walls down, destroyed the temple. It was the end of the first temple period. And so the Iron Age is really specifically matched up, if you will, to the history of Israel. Now, you'll see in Roman numeral 2 here, from this point on, frankly, the archaeological periods, Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age 1 and 2, that method, if you will, goes by the boards. And from this point on, all of the periods of time, historical periods of time, really relate to individual empires and associated countries. I say countries, really at that point, empires. I have a book here that I've used a lot, Behind the Scenes of the Old Testament. And it's kind of interesting to me that they have a chapter on archaeology of the late Bronze Age, archaeology of Iron Age 1, chapter 8, archaeology of Iron Age 2, and then it shifts archaeology of Babylonian and Persian periods. Again, you see the switch from tools that were being used and what they were made of to empires. And then the last chapter in this one section is archaeology of the Hellenistic period. So that's when they kind of start to merge back and forth. As quickly as I can, I'm going to spend a few seconds talking about Europe, because I think most of us are a little bit more familiar with these large clumps or swaths of time dealing with Europe. And the first of the great empires and time periods is usually the Greek Empire, running from about the 8th century to 338. It's about 450 years, again, to get this big hunk of time, so to speak. And their time as the 800-pound gorilla, if you will, and the outline gives some specifics that I'll skip over here. That's another thing in terms of history. You'll see it's almost always in history, either you deal with like arts and literature, or you deal with battles. They're kind of the wars. They're kind of like the touchstones, if you will, of how you work into a historical period of dealing with nations and empires. So from the Greeks, we go to the Roman Republic, and that's about 500 BC to 27 BC. That's like a 500-year swath. Sorry about that. I was waiting for John's call. So the Roman Republic has this 500-year period, if you will. And then, because Rome really does, oh God, sorry, I don't know how to do this here.
That's probably for me.
I think that should do that. You think your technical skills are limited? I'm trying to turn the whole phone off. Okay, sorry. I apologize to you and whoever may be listening like that.
No worries.
So from the Roman Republic, we go to the Roman Empire in the West. And that's when we think of the Roman Empire. Basically, that's what Americans think of. It's the Roman Empire in the West, with its capital city, obviously, of Rome, like that. And it goes from about 27 BC, when the Republic was put on hold and became an empire with a non-elected head of state, so to speak. And it goes through until the sack of Rome by the Goths in 476. And then, and we're not going to spend any time on it right now, but one of the great voids in most people's knowledge, including yours truly, is the Roman Empire in the East, which is also known as the Byzantium Empire. And that's, of course, when Constantine, well known in Christian circles, moved the capital of the Roman Empire, then still united, to what was then the city of Byzantium. And then shortly thereafter, the name changed to, guess what? Constantinople, based on Constantine. And that lasted, the Roman Empire at that point, headquartered in the East, lasted until the Turks captured Constantinople in 1453. Don't have time to do it, but it's a fascinating time frame, and it's really that pressure on Constantinople and the efforts to keep Constantinople away from the Turks, who were Muslims, was one of the reasons why the Reformation, hard to get back to that, but the Reformation was successful, because the Pope and a lot of the European heads of states were very concerned about the movement of the Muslims into that area, and therefore they didn't spend a lot of time dealing with this little problem up in Germany called the Reformation and Martin Luther.
All right. Well, Bob, we have about 10 minutes here, so why don't we skip on down here to the Levant, and why don't you help us with the Levant?
Thank you. Right. You see Roman numeral 4 there. It's Levant, and again, we said this area is called the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris rivers in the north and the Euphrates rivers in the south. It's in the land where Iraq and Iran currently exist as nations, to give yourself a concept of that. The Levant also has this little extra section called usually the Southern Levant, and that's when it starts to swing towards the Mediterranean Sea, and it goes down through Syria, and then down through Israel, and it goes all the way down to Egypt. And you'll see there, and it's important, we'll point it out later on, that Israel, both as a united monarchy and as divided nations, had the unfortunate geographical position of being between this large, fertile area and the nations that came out of that, and Egypt. And so you see, being the small nation between two large ones is generally not healthy for your nation. So the first of the major Mesopotamian empires is the Assyrians, the 900 to about 612. You see, that's about a 300-year period. In our class in the Minor Prophets, we will be dealing substantially with the empire of Assyria, because they truly were the 800-pound gorilla. They were the nation that was threatening. They were very warlike. Not pleasant the way they carried on their wars, and it was always a constant problem, both for the Northern Kingdom, particularly because the Northern Kingdom is obviously the kingdom that butted up against Assyria or Aram Damascus when it was not under the control of Syria like that. So the first of these great nations and historical periods really is the Assyrian period, which is about 300 years. And it ended in 612 by the next, if you will, the subsequent kingdom coming out of the same geographical area, the Levant, between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, was the Babylonians. And Babylonians are probably better known to us than the Assyrians, and probably best known of all is Nebuchadnezzar. And you'll see here that Babylonians defeated and took over the Assyrians in about 625. There's some very famous battles and the like that I won't take the time to go through, but it's amazing their time on the stage, and their influence was hugely substantial, but their time on the world stage as a leader was very short. It was really less than 100 years. It went from about 625 till 539, and in 539, they in turn were defeated by Persia, the last of the three great empires coming out of the Levant. And you'll see that it was Assyria that defeated the Northern Kingdom, 721, and it was Babylonia that defeated the Southern Kingdom, Judah, and destroyed Jerusalem in 586. And then this third kingdom comes on the scene, and it lasts for a significant number of years, about 200 years, from 539 to 333. And their time on the scene, Persia was, I guess, the most famous. They lost, hate to be famous for what you lost to, but I think they're most famous, frankly, for losing to Alexander the Great. And that was in basically 333. And from that point on, the whole Levant area, including the southern Levant, which includes the geographical area that was in Israel's control, both as united monarchy and as a northern kingdom, as a southern kingdom, became known in the period of time which is really Hellenization, which is Hellenization, just another word for under the influence of Greek thought and ideas like that. So that lasted from 333 And you'll see down if they're after this period. And again, I'll say next week, I'll do a lot more details, still hoping to stay at 10,000 feet of Israel and where it fits into that period of time. But Rome, again, we talked about Rome from a European viewpoint. If you look at Rome from the Levant period, and particularly the Southern Levant period, is they come up into play from 63 BC, and they are there until Israel is destroyed, literally destroyed, in 74 CE. So that's the first time we've switched from before the Common Era to, or before Christ to after Christ, 74, like that. And some of the details are there, and again, we'll skip over them, but Rome came into Israel at the invitation of two people who wanted to mediate, both who wanted to be both the head of state and the high priest. It was really gives mediation a bad name, because while one person was appointed the high priest, the next person was banished to Rome. And by the way, Pompey, who was a mediator, decided to make that land a province of Rome. So be careful what you ask for in a mediation or arbitration. I put here, and we can kind of stop at this point in time, but I call it, and maybe it's kind of a bad thing to do, but I call it into the abyss of history. After Rome left and destroyed Israel, Judah in 74 AD, there truly is a huge vacuum in most people's understanding of what happened to that area. And again, it's what I mentioned before. It was still under the control of Rome until much later. And then the next group of people, and when I say Rome, it's really Eastern Rome, Byzantium. And the next people that come into the scene are the Muslims, and they take Jerusalem in 662. So for this whole period from 74 AD to 662 AD, this whole area is part of the Roman world now being Byzantium world. And so, but if you ask me or asked almost anybody else what was happening at that point in time in that area, I think you'd get a lot of blank stares, including a blank stare from me. Very unknown period of time.
Well, Bob, let me ask you, is there some way that you'd want to summarize or wrap up or give us one of our famous Bay Presbyterian takeaways out of this?
I'll let you know, John, I always footnote you when I use the word takeaway. I don't want to get involved in any lawsuits with you.
I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway is, again, I find it to be very helpful. And again, we're going to get into the details of things. But before you get into the details and to assist us as we walk through the details, particularly in the class, it is really helpful to have in mind some very large overview of these historical time periods. Again, a lot of people criticize history. It's just memorization of a bunch of individual dates and names you can't pronounce, etc. But while the individual date may not be too important, it is important and helpful, I guess is more important. It's helpful to have these time frames in mind so that when you're thinking about, well, what is 1000 BC and what is happening? Why has it got a name? It's associated with the Assyrians. It's associated with the United Monarchy. It puts it in some sort of historical context. And for us who are much more familiar with Europe, it's kind of interesting to look while studying the details of the Levant and Israel to kind of go back and say, well, what was happening in Europe at that point in time? And so it's really the Middle Ages is what it is like that. But all these time frames, I think, are helpful kind of keys that help unlock the door that make an understanding of history, and in our case, what we're going to study in the Minor Prophets, much easier to understand and helpful to us. So that's
one thing I like to say is everything happens in a context.
Right.
There's no history that happens just simply by itself, and so everything we say, everything we do, all of history is a matter of context. So this is all very helpful. Well, what are we going to do next week?
Next week, it is my intention to get closest to the actual class of minor prophets. You might not have appreciated it, and I'm not sure I would have, but we have moved from the outer universe of the class on the minor prophets, keep moving more and more towards the epicenter of the actual class. And next week, the final week of our devotions, we're going to actually look at a little bit of the details of the history of Israel and putting it again in the context so that when we go into the class again and get into the details, we'll have this overview in mind.
Very good, sir. Well, we'll look forward to that, and we appreciate it. We appreciate your scholarship and the time that that you spent doing this. So thank you very much for that, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Bob. God bless you.
And to you.